want to see an image that causes me physical pain? Man, you can't have fucking shit in this Imperium. Let me check this really quick. Yeah, it's fine. Good evening. You know what time it is. We're finally here. We're gonna finish out this trilogy. We're looking at Galaxy in Flames by Ben Counter. If this is your first time running by my videos, quick little thing, spoiler warning, obviously, and this is all based purely on my opinion and my own reading preferences, and I am getting more versed in Warhammer lore, but I am not the best at it. So if I do get something wrong, point me towards the book it's in, or if it's too broad of a concept, just explain it to me in the comments below. Also, I am critical of everything I read, so there's always criticism in my reviews. Boring disclaimer out of the way, let's get to the review. Here, look at this book. Look at it. I finished this in April of 2024, and if you watched my previous video, you might be remembering, didn't you say that you read the last book in April 2024? Man, you had a really quick turnaround time on that, and you'd be correct. What time frame did I finish this in? 1 week? A couple days? How about less than 24 hours? Please don't look at me. All I can say is that ADHD is very powerful when you're unmedicated, and sometimes it makes you lock in really hard on something that you're really interested in, and this book was no fucking exception. So today's review is going to be a bit different in that how I read this kind of affects the way I'm going to talk about it. First things first, I need to be in the writer's room where this fucking thing was written. The entire trilogy, really, because Ben Counter is on a mission in this novel, and the mission is to make you suffer. I don't know what I did. I don't know what the rest of you did, but someone did something, and he took offense to it. I think the best part of me finishing this entire thing the day I finished False Gods is that I don't think I've ever read something that has felt so cohesive before, if that makes sense. Like, I've read so many books that are parts of a series, but I always buy them one at a time, so I always have like a little gap of time between reading them. But getting to read this directly after False Gods, I legit, when I was writing the last review, I couldn't remember what was plot points from that book and what was plot points from this book, because they just kind of feel like one solid entity. And I think part of the charm of this entire trilogy together is that it quickly goes from, oh no, I know what's coming, to oh no, it's here. Especially if you're going into it, say, knowing that a very specific event happens in the last part of the book. And honestly, I say the last part, it is probably actually like 2/3 of the book, but we'll get to that. Now, what I think is like really unique about this specific novel is that the entire thing takes place in the Istvan system, but it never feels like it's overstaying its welcome. Like, I don't feel bored with the location. And I think part of that is that we are cutting between the surface and the ship for a lot of the book. And so that tension of knowing a certain event that is coming, is really cut up by, I guess you would say, the levity of the ship scenes. Even though the ship scenes themselves with the Remembrancers, they are equally as tense. It's just, for the time being, it feels like the tension on the ship and the tension on Istvan are two separate things. And what I really, really enjoyed was how Ben Counter was able to, like, tie them together in the end. It definitely, if this novel were if you were to show someone the definition of stressed in book form, I think I would show them this novel, because both of those, like, settings together, I'm constantly stressed while reading it. That's part of the reason, I think, why I finished it in, I don't know, like 8 hours? No, not even that. 5 hours? Yeah, from what I could tell, it was probably like, this probably took me 8 hours-ish to read, because I had to eat food in between reading. From what I remember, I finished False Gods on a very slow workday, and I said, well, I knew I might finish it, so I'm just gonna crack this bad boy open and start it. And then it was 12 a.m. That is what I remember. But seriously, Ben Counter does not pull punches in this book. And he really, really knows how to write things going to shit. And I think part of that is that I really enjoy how he writes action. This is something that's going to come up when I talk about Battle for the Abyss, because he wrote Battle for the Abyss. And if you've watched all of my videos so far, at least 5 of them, if I have that many, if I can count, mentioned that I dislike Battle for the Abyss. And part of that is because I think there's not enough action in it. But here, he does a great job, and I think it's because he's in his element for most of this novel. Really, honestly, the saddest part of the way I read this is I can't actually remember much of my reading experience, I guess you could say, because I read it so fast that I was just kind of like locked in the entire time. I legitimately couldn't think of a critique from a reader's perspective because that's how well the book had me in its fucking clutches the whole time. That's not to say it doesn't have problems. It's just, as a reader, just trying to enjoy the narrative in front of me as it's coming hot off the heels of what False Gods left us with, I have really no notes. I can't think of anything legitimately. We'll get into what problems I do have with this novel, though. It's just, I want to make it very clear, I don't know if it's because I read it so fast, or if there really, as a reading experience, there's not really much to criticize about it, but I want to make it clear that that is what I felt. And because of that, I didn't want to try and, like, force a critique that I didn't feel was accurate to my experience, because that's really what a lot of these critiques are, is things that bother me as a reader that might bother someone else, so I bring them up. If you personally have a criticism from a reading standpoint that you'd like to share in the comments below, I highly encourage you to share them, because right now, I'm not a reliable narrator. I got so excited talking about Galaxy in Flames that I have to put hair tie in because my room got hot. So after blasting through the reading section about as fast as I blasted through this novel, let's talk about the writing. So, like I said before, Ben Counter is amazing at tension in this novel. And to be honest with you, going in, I did not know that Istvan III was different from the Drop Site Massacre. So, yeah, I had some completely different expectations for this book, and not really in a bad way. I just read Istvan, and my brain went, no, I can't be here already! Rest assured, now I know the difference. The difference does not matter, it's actually equally as painful. And I think that's part of the beauty of going in right away, having some sort of vague knowledge about the heresy. I know Istvan is bad, but I don't know everything about Istvan, so I'm sitting here the entire time reading, butt clenched, because I'm terrified of what this is going to end like. And then, on top of that, we have this entire other storyline going on with the Remembrancers, and looking back on it, I was kind of like 50-50 on that storyline, but overall, I think that it worked really well to, like, cut through everything that was happening on the surface so that we weren't stuck there and getting fatigue from just being on Istvan III the entire novel. Which, you know, if this were any other series, that wouldn't be a problem, right? But the problem is that in Warhammer, we're so used to, like, a vast expanse of setting, and even the first two novels actually do not help with this because we are jumping around places all the time, that it can actually be very easy, it turns out, to get setting fatigue. And I think just the difference between the ship and the surface is enough to cut that down in this specific instance. Also, once again, I think the way that these two plotlines were constructed was very clever, because they feel a bit separate. One is whatever the fuck is going on with Keeler, she's becoming a saint, and the other is, oh my god, they don't know they're all about to die. And I don't know, I don't think I was expecting them to coincide the way they did, but near the end, if you haven't read the novel yet, this is like, I am now ruining the novel for you, so please stop watching, or just mute me, but near the end, we get this really impactful scene where the Remembrancers basically watch the initial bombing of Istvan, and I remember that entire thing being burned into my brain, and also just really appreciating how these two storylines ended up tying together. It wasn't like two sets of people doing their own separate thing, which, I don't know, that just made me really happy, and that's not always the case for everything you read. There are some things where it's just like, this is happening here, and this is happening here, and they'll never intersect. I just really liked the closure of... I really liked the closure of, man, I'm not gonna cry over Space Marines, I swear. I like, when I was practicing for this review, I started crying, and I'm not gonna cry when I talk about these fucking scenes, I swear. I'm a little bit spoiled about what comes later, but it makes me very sad. But the closure of Mercedes thinking that, oh, Loken died in that initial bombardment, and just like the genuine horror of these characters watching a rebellion in real time, and it's starting on such a horrific note. I don't know, that scene is burned into my brain. And I think the part of this book, why it had me the entire time, is just moments like this. Moments within these storylines merging together with characters that I really care about. I think this has really helped with the quality of the description in this novel, I guess you could say. It's definitely not to the level of Graham McNeil's description, but I think Ben Counter has his own, like, really nice style that is still very gritty, but it's well balanced, and it really shines as you get further into the book. Once again, especially in Istvan III, like, those scenes needed that horrible, gross, gritty detail to really drive home how horrific this event is. What I particularly like about Ben Counter's style of description is that it feels like, to me, it's built for world building. Like, he puts a lot of effort into details that enhance the setting or expand on the possibilities of the setting, if that makes sense. Like, a couple of things that me, first time Warhammer nerd when I was reading this, didn't even know going in, that I didn't even think for possibilities going in. Things like gene-enhanced adults. Like, all I knew was kids were turned into Space Marines. I didn't even think about how you could still gene-enhance an adult. They won't be as good as a Marine, but they're still, like, big, beefy dudes. And then, like, the whole descriptions of the first saint and how that is built up and treated, the progression of the cult, the concept of virus bombs. Once again, this is like my 5th Warhammer book, so I'm learning a lot of stuff just reading through his specific style of description. What's really important is that all of these things that I'm naming now are really things that come up later on in the series and are explored deeper, but I liked that they are first established here so that I have just the idea of the concept, if that makes sense. Unfortunately, it's at this point that a few of my problems with the novel start to rear its head, and I want to make something clear before I start to talk about them. A lot of people will say that the 3rd novel is the weakest of the first 3, and that's not wrong. It is an entirely fair assessment, but I also don't like using the word weaker, because that kind of implies sometimes to some people bad. And I want to make it's not a bad novel by any means. It's just that when you have to put this novel next to Dan Abnett and his mastery of characterization and Graham McNeil's gritty, just all-encompassing description, this one feels like the weaker of the 3 because of that. And I think part of that is that those have really dynamic plot lines, I guess you could say. I was saying how we travel locations a lot, there's a lot happening in terms of character development and building tension and storyline and all that stuff. And unfortunately, that doesn't leave a lot left for this novel. This is the climax. This is the end of the arc. We're going to be pretty much getting the end of character development for everyone and everything. There are some characters who have just stopped developing at this point because they've reached the point that they need to be in to execute this ending. Once again, by no means a bad thing, but when you compare it to what's been building up to this, it can feel weaker, and I think it's weaker in the writing sense and not the narrative sense. I will continue to use weaker until I have a better description, but I by no means mean bad when I say it. I just mean when compared to the other 2, there's some places where it doesn't quite measure up to their level, and other places where I think it kind of goes beyond. all that said and done, the first kind of issue I have with the writing of this novel has to do with, like, characters and characterization. If you haven't watched my Horse Rising video, this is the first time you're watching at all, I love characters and characterization. It's the whole reason I read a novel. If it's got a character-driven plot, I'm probably gonna like it, to be honest with you. And the problem here isn't that he's, like, mischaracterized any of our mainstay characters. I actually still think that they are quite strong and enjoyable in this novel. It's more of that I don't really like the new characters that were introduced. The first thing that comes to mind is the Titan crew. I don't know, they didn't hit with me. I think partially it was that they came off too strong in terms of, like, their character archetypes, if that makes sense. One of them's the religious fanatic, the other one is obviously the straight man to his fanaticism. And I don't know, I feel like their character archetypes kind of drove a lot of their decisions to points that I didn't feel were entirely justifiable at times. It doesn't help that one of these decisions makes me want to tear the head off of one of them, casually in Minecraft, of course, but compared to all the other characters that we already have, I think I just enjoy the roster we've been with for 3 books now, more than some of the newer characters that were introduced. That's not to say they were bad, or that all of them were bad, it's just this is, like, my own personal gripe with these characters, I guess you could say. I'm all about, like, oh, you can have this major character trait, but I want to see more characterization around it. I don't want that to just be the pinnacle of the character. I don't like one-note Andys. And then, of course, as I talked about in my preamble, character progression feels pretty stagnant in this novel, and that's because characters have gotten to where they need to be for this climax to happen. Except for with newer characters, but my problem with the newer characters is that I'm not as interested in them, so the progression, while interesting-ish, is not what I want to focus on. And then my other issue with the writing, which I will try to make sense, is that there's a lot of really convenient things that happen that feel like they're happening for the sake of driving the story forward. Now, of course, I know, things need to happen to drive the plot forward. That's how story works. But there is natural plot progression, and then there is plot progression because the plot needs to happen. Not every event in this novel is like this, but there are a lot of very convenient plot points that make the story go forward, in a way that I feel like it's just like, oh wow, that is really coincidental that that happened, to the point where I feel like it was put in because we needed to justify something we're gonna do. Quite a few of these actually come up within the Saul storyline, and the first one is, of course, Saul just knowing Garo and being friends with him, like, oh wow, it just so happens that this Space Marine that I've never brought up before, who is, like, my best buddy, we're not talking about Lucius right now, my best buddy ever, my brother from another gene seed, he happens to be here, and then he ends up pretty much saving Saul's life so that he can warn the people on the surface of what's about to happen. That feels a bit too convenient for me. And then the other thing is the whole switch with Rylanor, because if the whole point of Istvan III is to cleanse the rebelling legions of Marines that might go against the rebellion, why let Rylanor switch out with Saul? Because he was on the list and Rylanor wasn't. So obviously, Eidolon or Fulgrim thought that they could, like, change Rylanor to their side. Obviously they couldn't, but they thought they could. I might be forgetting, like, a minor plot point where they let them do that, but I don't think I am. I think they just let them switch, and to me that doesn't make a lot of sense. Maybe Eidolon thought, well, I could just, I don't know, 360 no-scope him, it'll be fine. But at that point I'm, like, trying to justify a major, like, what I see as a major plot hole to me. But also, it is once again one of those convenient moments where it's like, if Saul switches with Rylanor, then Saul can be up here to learn about the betrayal, and if Saul learns about the betrayal, then he can go down and warn the Marines about the betrayal, and in turn warn Garo about the betrayal, so that Garo and the Flight of the Eisenstein can happen. So Garo fucks off after that happens, and Saul shows up and he's like, hey guys, we're all gonna die, and then Istvan III happens. I want to make it clear, this doesn't take away my enjoyment of the novel at all, it just happens a lot, and it's something that I do notice, so I point it out. And I know from certain novels with certain afterwords that there was a whole writer's room. This was planned. All of these things were planned. Even if the heresy ended up a lot longer than they planned. there was talk about how this was all going to go down. So if they needed to plot it out like this, I wouldn't be surprised if that accidentally got translated into book form, which, I'm gonna be real with you, this is a problem that comes up a lot in later books of the Heresy, especially with, unfortunately, some of the longer ones, like Fulgrim. And that's my thoughts on the writing, but you might notice that I've kind of danced around a very important subject, a very important event that occurs with this fuck-ass book, and that would be Istvan III itself. We're gonna do this time. I'm not gonna cry. I'm not. I know I just spent like probably 5 to 10 minutes, however this is gonna be edited down, critiquing the writing of this novel. But fuck me, man. Istvan III got me. If you've never read Galaxy in Flames, I want you to know that I think, if I remember correctly, Istvan III, the actual event, is like 2/3 of the book, which feels like a long time. But the way it's done is just fucking spectacular. I know, from reading the comments, because I read all of them, that some of you couldn't make it past the 3rd book of the Horus Heresy, or you couldn't even make it past the 1st book of the Heresy, and I completely understand if you couldn't. So this is really a comment for you. There are more versions of Istvan III. There are quite a few throughout the Heresy, specifically within the first couple of novels. This one is the best one. If someone talks about Istvan III, if someone quotes Istvan III, 9 times out of 10, from what I've seen, it is this version, and that is because it is iconic. I don't even think it's because people couldn't make it past this book. I just think this is the most impactful version. And honestly, I think there's a lot of good reasons for this. First of all, the general descriptions of this event are burned into my mind. How do I even begin? There's a whole scene with Angron showing up, and we get to see Marines. We're not afraid, but we're running away from Angron scared. And that's just an amazing scene within itself, watching as the entirety of the World Eaters that could try to stop Angron from tearing the entire rebellion apart, the rebellion to the rebellion. Literally, all of the horrifying descriptions of how the Marines die when the initial virus bombs are dropped, like literally turning to jelly and soup in their armors, that is actual description in this novel. So much of it is just like absolutely horrific, and it's burned into my mind. And as much as I do actually like the other tellings and stuff, this one was the first one. This one hit the hardest. Those tellings just kind of added more context and sadness. There are sad things that happen, but it added more to this. This could stand on its own and be amazing. And then I talked about the Remembrancers witnessing this event already. I'm just going to bring it up again because, fuck, this was, not only was the scene incredibly tense, I was terrified the entire time, but then they brought in a character that I didn't think was going to be, like, as iconic as he was, but I was really hoping it was going to be Iacton Kurz, and oh my god, I am so happy they utilized him, because he's my number one, he's my MVP, okay? I sincerely hope he comes back, because he is in Flight of the Eisenstein, and he's like one of my favorite characters there. And him just like in the moment of like, you're like, is he going to listen to them? Is he going to help them? Or is he going to kill them on the floor right now? And then he helps, and I'm just sitting there like, fuck, get the fuck out of there right now! And I'm screaming, and it was so fucking intense because these people are normal humans and they're so squishy, and I just, mwah. And that's just the end of the Remembrancer storyline. There are other character story endings coming up here soon. First of all, Loken and Tarek. Flashback to the picture at the start of this fucking review. I legitimately was brought to tears when Tarek died. I was actually so sad. I'm not gonna cry again. I don't even know what to say about the scene. It's like, it's just so tragic, especially because Marines, it is a brotherhood. They see each other as brothers, and that has been so abundantly clear in these first 3 novels. And to watch Loken, Abaddon, Horus Axmund, and Tarek, to watch their relationship slowly fall apart has been awful enough. But to see it climax like this, and to see, just everything that happens there fucks me up so bad. This is the reason I fucking hate Erebus, by the way. I was full of rage, I was full of sadness and distraught, and I'm fucking crying. Everything that happened here hurts. No, we're cool. We're cool. We're chill. See, this is what happens when you write strong characters. I get attached, and then I want to tear my heart out when they die. See, that was bad enough. But then they took my boy Saul from me. I think I gained genuine depression after the last couple of chapters of this book. Because it was the end of Tarbits, right? I'm so fucking sad. Bro, that entire ending scene just... it's burned into my brain, yeah? Like, these Marines, these men who fought for the side they truly believed in, sitting there being like, did this even matter? Did what we do even matter? And him, as the bombs are fucking dropping, just being like, yes, they'll remember us. Man. And god damn it, they do fucking remember it. Everything that happens on Istvan III has echoes throughout the entire heresy. Even if I haven't read the whole thing yet, I know enough about it to know that their actions here mattered, and that fucking makes it more painful. Anyways, the idea of them all broken, ready for death, I cried. I'm crying again. I will cry again later. Look at me in my eyes. Do not have favorite characters in the Horus Heresy. It does not matter if they're helmetless, named Marines. Fuck, it don't even matter if they're Ultramarines, okay? They will fucking die. Just genuinely everything about the Marines' last stand. Yeah, the 2/3 of the book is Istvan III, but the last couple of chapters fucked me up so bad. Once I read this the way I did, once I was brought to tears by this, I knew I couldn't stop reading the Heresy. I knew that even if I lost wind in my sails, the itch, the need to see it through was going to forever be present in the back of my mind. And I think that itch and the events of this novel have carried me a lot so far. So, after crying, after I said I wouldn't, do I have anything academic to say about this book? No. But I do want to offer a retrospective. First things first. I think this series needed to be 3 books. Like, the first trilogy needed to happen. I don't think it would have been nearly as impactful. I don't think this would have made me cry if it was just 1 book. Or it needed to be written by someone who was like a masterclass of character and description at the same time and plot. It's just too massive to have been 1 novel and to have hurt me the way it did. And really, take a moment to stop and think. If you have read the first 3 books, you've read over 1,500 pages of these characters, growing with them, growing to love or hate them. That's a lot. These 3 novels are iconic for a reason. If you couldn't get past Horus Rising and you want to try again, I highly encourage that you do, because I think together they are the strongest. Maybe don't be as insane as me and read them back to back in one day, but do try to read them close together if you can, because cohesively, I think they are part of a wonderful whole. And with that being said, I also want to say that so far, I do actually think these are the best novels in the series, and that it kind of goes downhill from there. Now, mind you, I am barely starting book 10, but I'm on book 10, and the first 3 novels are the strongest. The decline in quality is not immediate, I guess you could say, but it is a slowly building thing. It's really noticeable after Fulgrim, I don't want to say drop in quality, but also that's kind of what it is. After Fulgrim is where it's the most noticeable, I guess you could say, because that is when we stop talking about any stories connected to this. So they can't rely on the strengths of these novels to propel their story forward anymore. Of course, this stuff is still mentioned, it's still in the background, but actually, not really. That is a lie, because there are some novels that are wholly detached from this story, and I think that's the first weakness of the Horus Heresy. After Fulgrim, there's a novel called Descent of Angels, and Descent of Angels has nothing to do with any of these plot points. In fact, if you took Horus Heresy, the name, off of it, and then just presented it to me, it could read as a early one-shot. Like, the only reason I could place it in the Horus Heresy is because it technically takes place during the Great Crusade. It is completely self-contained, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but when you're coming off of the events of this, and even then, when you're coming off of the events of Fulgrim, it is really jarring, and unfortunately the novel itself is kind of boring. So it's just, it doesn't quite hit the same after these first 3 novels, and I get why a lot of people couldn't make it past these first 3 novels. And of course, there is a proposed solution to this, and that is following a reading chart, but I don't think it's that simple. Almost every single book I've read so far has some sort of like thing or event that gets referenced down the line in the heresy, so skipping around is not perfect. I will be the first to admit that if you skip a book in this, it is highly likely that you will miss something important to the plot. I can't say it's 100% across the board, but I will say that novels that I know I'm skipping, I've went and read their synopsises, and there are things that happen that would be very confusing if I didn't know about them beforehand. Also, not everyone is going to know that advice going in, or even worse, they could be like me, who would be bothered having to skip around a bunch of content, which I'm already bothered that I'm skipping some novels. And keep in mind, this is retrospectively. We have access to the whole thing now. Back when this was first being published, this was even bigger of an issue. Like, for example, my own brother stopped reading these after, like, book 12, because partially they were just taking too long to get out, and also partially because of some of the quality issues. Really, what it comes down to is, at the end of the day, the Horus Heresy is not for everyone, and that is completely okay. I would say, at the very least, read these first 3 books. This will give you the gist of it, and you can stop there. Or, if you kind of are curious and you want to be along the ride like I am, then I am excited to see what you get into for the next books. Maybe you follow a reading chart. Maybe you try to tackle the whole thing like I do. Both have their ups and downs, and honestly, no matter what, we're gonna read them anyways, aren't we? So, do I recommend Galaxy in Flames? If you've read the first 2, absolutely. If you have not read the first 2 yet, please read them and then read this novel. Istvan III is honestly, I think, a worthy reason to do it. There's actually a lot of audio dramas online. I've heard clips in passing, and they fuck me up again and again. I'm traumatized by my boys dying. But honestly, the audio drama people who put all their effort and intention into capturing the emotion and the tone of Ben Counter's work, hats off to you. Wonderful stuff. But yeah, that's the end of the first 3 books of the Horus Heresy, and I think the only thing I could do now is take this cute football-sized giraffe, curl up in a ball, and cry.